My name is Kjell Magne Gjelle. I'm a home brewer here in Norway. And
How long are you home brewer?
I've been brewing since 2015, about. I've fermented most things with Kveik.
Because Kveik is very traditional way of the brewing in Norway.
Yes,
could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Mostly used in traditional farmhouse brewing. And in the recent years, the craft beer scene had discovered it. And so now it's very popular. The main difference is Kveik's temperature when it ferments. It tolerates really high temperatures without getting the phenols that you get from normal yeast.
So why you think it's that tradition survived in Norway in particular? Because yes, Kveiks are also you can find in Sweden, you can find in Lithuania, it's coming to Poland as well. But why it survived in the Norwegian region as good like it is now?
I think it's like a community of these farm brewers. They just use this Kveik to keep it as their house animal, sort of. And they can't think of using any other yeast. So it's just natural for them.
They regenerate it.
Yeah.
So they have a strain, and then
they can use this
it, and then
Kveik ring that they drop in the wort and hang it to dry for the next brew.
That's what you do into?
I don't do that much. I just scrape from the bottom and keep it that way.
And then you add to the fresh beer again.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
You can also dry it, right? And,
yeah. Most
like
use is to dry it. Yeah.
Because then you can freeze it also, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very tolerant.
So you can freeze Kveik as well.
When it's dried, you can freeze it and keep it for years.
Okay.
So it has to be dry because otherwise the cell walls will crack.
Yeah.
But if they're all slowly shrinking, like and drying up, then you can freeze it like that.
And then after rehydration, they will obviously come back to life and reproduce and self-ferment.
So instead temperature, what's make Kveik different than other yeasts?
Fermentation time.
Fermentation time, yeah. I think, yeah.
What about flavor profile?
And the flavor profile is also very interesting in this. You have these types of Kveik that have totally different qualities and flavor profiles. And yeah, it's like some like it and some don't. It's just that when you get a beer that it's Kveik, you know it instantly. Yeah, this is Kveik, and yeah.
How do you recognize this? Because Kveik are some strains are quite different. So
yeah, it's the spiciness and so in this Voss Kveik you get this orange-like flavors. Also, it depends on the beer style or whatever you fermented. So if you make a really strong stout, then you won't recognize it instantly because then it's hidden.
It's the same, like in also with mead. We haven't done a lot of batches with Kveik, but we have made a few. And if you have a lot of honey character, like a sweet traditional, for example, then you will not notice the yeast tones that much. But if it's lighter and less sweet, then you will, like a session mead or something like that, it will be more prominent. But I mean, Kveik is the only yeast that can ferment a whole batch in like 1 or 2 days.
Yeah, it's crazy.
At the most like efficient, which is absolutely crazy.
So they fast. They quite strong on temperature.
Yep.
So why they not as popular outside the Norway?
It's getting very popular now. I've seen in warmer climates like Brazil, the whole craft beer scene there is primarily using Kveik for all the beers.
Because you don't need temperature control.
You don't need it.
In a way. Because the average temperature range is about like what?
38 degrees. From 24 to 38 degrees Celsius.
Which is way higher than even the Belgians do it, you know. I mean, it's way higher than most yeast will tolerate. They will simply, not die, but they will sort of pass out. It's a bit strange, but in Norway, in these traditional farms, they usually have like a small house or like an outhouse or something that they brew beer in. Traditionally, as far as I remember, these are like typically with a fire
in the middle, maybe, and with a big kettle.
Yeah. So the temperature inside that room will be quite higher. Yeah. That's probably why, because in Norway it's like either you're inside and it's hot, or you're outside and it's really cool. So you have to choose.
The temperature will go down once you finish brewing, but when you keep it inside this big barrel and it's hot to start with, and the Kveik is really going, it produces itself heat from itself. So
yeah, and especially in the first 2 days, which is basically what you need in some cases.
2-3 days and it's done. Now these days you get Kveik from brew shops all around. I've tried some, but the best is to get it straight from the source.
Which is?
Which is the brewer in the region where they brew it. Like Sigmund Jernes in Voss, he have his own Kveik that he dries and sell to the local shop there.
But some of the, like, for example, this strain that you're talking about, this Voss Kveik, was also commercialized by Lalvin.
It is commercial.
And now you can actually buy it like for brewers packages. But Kveik was really popular at some point, I remember, in the US, because they started to figure out that if you ferment it at different temperatures, you get different effects, but it's quite, it's a very strong fermenter. So you can finish like a pale ale in 3 or 4 days, for example, with most of the fermentation. So it cuts down on the production, the time that you spend, which is of course really interesting for any industrial brewer.
And also the Kveik that you get commercially, it's not the real thing really, because it's been cleaned. So it's missing some strains and bacteria that's supposed to be there.
So it's much different on the flavor, you will say, from commercial to the...
It can lack some flavors. So I'm no expert on it, but they say that you should get the original Kveik if you can. But it works the same way. It's
really organic, because these farmers have just been, this is like hundreds of years old, and they didn't know what was going on really, but they know that if they kept the yeast and they used it again, it will make beer. So over the years, and if they run out of yeast, they would go to the neighbor and have some of his yeast and blend with their yeast. So it was like an organic thing, like every generation it was a slightly different yeast. So over the years, they analyzed some of the samples, and they found that some of the strains have like 50% Kveik yeast, but also some of like bread yeast, you can get in the shop. Which they just mix it, because they keep it in the farm in jars or things like that, right?
Don't have any numbers, but I believe that this Voss Kveik would have maybe 5 or 10 brewers before it was discovered. So
some of them quite old. But now it's a lot of interest, and I think they're building like a Kveik library of sorts, so you can have different strains, and they have like maps showing, as far as I remember, they have maps showing like different qualities, like fermentation temperatures and flavor profiles and things like that. But it's really kind of a coincidence. It could have, because they have it also in Lithuania, Russia, Ukraine, I think, or at least in Eastern Europe and parts of Scandinavia. So why it was here that people started to write about it and think about it, I don't know. I think if you want to really experiment with Kveik in mead, I think it's better to start lower in sugar.
What do you mean lower?
Lower, like less than 100 points on the SG scale. Maybe go down to 80 or 60 or something.
1100,
1.100, 1.100.
Yeah.
So I just say 100 usually.
Yeah, 100.
So it's like on the specific gravity scale.
And Kveik is working best in its natural environment, which is bare wort. So I guess you would need nutrients. And keep the pH between 4.2 to 3.5, I guess.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
But that's also a general good rule for any kind of fermentation, especially well, also mead. But yeah, but there is a lot of interesting. I mean, there is not a lot of commercial Kveik meads out there.
I don't know of any.
No, so there's some potential there. We might have a look into that at some point at Mioderia for sure.
Yeah, at my early days in homebrewing, I went with a header mead with Kveik, and it fermented to 0, so it was champagne, and it tasted like nothing. So, like champagne.
Yeah.
But heather honey is quite strong, so that's interesting.
No, not header honey, but header flowers.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Okay, right.
When you brew with Kveik, you have to make sure that you have enough headspace in your fermenter, because it produces a lot of foam these days.
But it not depends of the strain because I heard some Kveik could produce very low foam.
That could be. But
I might be wrong.
It's very active, so.
But I think that's mainly a problem with beer because you have a lot more like grain particles and proteins and things like that.
Yeah,
so when you ferment a mead normally, you only need like this much headspace.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
But maybe with Kveik, you should go a little bit higher. Like you said, it's very active.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I'm cool of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.